Ever since October 7th, I've been, I think, more devoted to just being a visibly Jewish person.
Hello, bonjour, shalom, and welcome to Culturally Jewish. I'm David Sklar.
And I'm Ilana Zackon.
Join us as we explore Jewish art, culture, and identity in Canada. On this week's episode, we chat with musician and radio broadcaster Talia Schlanger on the release of her debut album, Grace for the Going, which came out in February.
Mama always wanted me to be a doctor, but I became an artist and that really shocked her. Now I'm interviewing people in the biz, pros, and newish, but all of them are artists and they're culturally Jewish.
David, you have a mustache. Sorry, I had to say it.
I do.
David just logged on to record this episode and suddenly has this mustache, and I think it looks great. And I just needed to put that out there for everyone.
Well, thank you, because it's the first time I've ever had a mustache. Usually I just have like dirty scruff for 2 or 3 weeks and then just shave it completely off. Last night, randomly, I just decided to keep the stash on and see what it feels like on me.
You're like a new person.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to spend all episode talking about your mustache as much as I would like to. I thought this would be an interesting time to reflect back on the podcast so far. It's been a bit over a year, which is nuts. It feels like it's been a lot longer. We did our first episode in April of 2023, and we've tackled a very wide variety of arts, from puppet shows to architecture to comedy and so much more. In our interview that's coming up, we talk with someone who is also an artist who, unlike us, started out in media and then, became a musician, whereas we are actors, and then we ended up doing this podcast. And I thought, we can look back on the year and also just talk about what that weird contradiction in a way is, because normally you're just on one side of the interview, but we are artists interviewing other artists. Like, how do you wrap your head around that, first of all, David?
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing, it feels like it's two different worlds. And I would say interviewing people before October 7th and after October 7th
God, yes.
is such a different
I was going to say the same thing
entirely. So we've spoken up and we've talked a lot about rising anti-Semitism in the arts industry, anti-Zionism, that big movement. And it does feel like it's a bit of a, every time we interview someone, it's changed now, because we want to know how that world, our world that we live in now, is affecting them as artists today too.
But you know what I find so interesting is I feel like before October 7th, it's like, Jewish arts, whatever. Like, we have our niche audience. It's not the headline news at the CJN. And then all of a sudden, the arts people, who tend to be the most leftist, are making headlines.
Yes.
So suddenly being a Jewish artist is like a political statement, and it means all these things. And we're no longer in this little bubble. I find that so fascinating.
It's very true. Like, just existing as a Jewish artist becomes a political statement, and being a Jewish artist is controversial all of a sudden, which, before was never a thing. It was, oh, that's interesting. You're Jewish and you happen to be a painter. And now it's, but what does that now mean more moving forward? And we talked with Talia a little bit about that, where she, I mentioned she wears a Star of David and what that meant to her as she's posting things on social media, and the fear and the nervousness of being a very visibly Jewish artist, what that means today.
This is also making me realize how important something like our podcast is, because I've been talking to a lot of people here in Montreal, some of which are writers or professors who are getting literally canceled, like people who are being told, just because you're Jewish, we actually don't want to publish your article, or you need to take Jewish characters out of the project that you're doing because nobody wants to hear that right now. Yeah. So being able to amplify voices, especially of Canadian Jews, we certainly don't have the loudest voices in terms of the larger American landscape, I think is more important than ever.
Yeah, and I think it's even reflected I can't prove this, but it's very interesting that I post these episodes on my social media, right? It's one of the only things I do post every 2 weeks. It says, check out this latest episode. And it's very interesting, and I cannot prove this, but I posted the last week's episode about Max, the Holocaust survivor in the movie The Boy in the Woods. And as soon as I posted it, I noticed a few of my friends dropped off and removed my my Instagram feed. So
that is so messed up, just especially because it's a Holocaust story.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Now I can't prove that, but it's interesting. Within a few hours, I lost some people.
I found the opposite, actually. So I tend to not post about our episodes purely because of the fact that of what we were talking about right now, about like, I don't need to publicize my Judaism. Everyone knows I'm Jewish, but like, I don't want to deal with some trolls that I know who I'm going to have to look at differently. So I'd just rather not know. But with the Maxwell Smart episode, it moved me so much that I wanted to post it. And I got some really lovely comments from non-Jewish artists and people saying like, this is so important. There's not that many survivors left. But yeah, it's a strange thing being a podcaster / journalist, whatever you want to call us, and being in the arts. Because I think I lie to myself a bit thinking that I'm very anonymous. It's like, oh, I just talk to people privately and then forget that I'm publicly vocalizing my opinions on a podcast, which, mostly Jews are probably the ones listening, but you and I know a lot of the same people, David. So it's very possible that some haters, you know what? I'm going to click on this because I want to get proof that those Zionists are after us.
Yeah, that they're planning something together to something very nefarious, And it's true, and we talked with Talia about this too. And she's someone that, I consider a bit of a Canadian celebrity. I've listened to her a bunch on CBC's Q. And it was very interesting, hearing these two different hats that she wears.
Do you find it helpful? I asked Talia this question. I don't know if she gave, the most thorough answer. So I'm going to throw it to you preemptively. Having been on this side, do you take anything when you get interviewed, let's say for a show that you're working on? Are you like, oh, okay, like I know what is helpful for me when I'm doing my podcast from the person I'm interviewing? Does that ever come up for you?
I think it's changed now that I'm actually doing this podcast. And I think the best thing is just to be sort of very conversational and just say, many times as artists, we have to be interviewed multiple times. And a lot of times the questions are very rote. Tell us what this show is about and what does it mean to you? And how do you get into this character? And then it becomes like you're a bit of a parrot just regurgitating information. I think it's always great when you have something new and something interesting that, the interviewer found about your life or your family. And then that sparks that more conversational-esque relationship, because then you can just chat about something that maybe they haven't heard of before. And I really take Tom Power's advice on Q. I think he's an absolute fabulous interviewer. He really just is more conversational in types. And he says, let's just talk. I wasn't even planning on talking about this. Let's just go down this route and see where it goes. And sometimes it works. And you know what? Sometimes he says it didn't work, right? It just became awkward and we had to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we've been keeping you waiting for too long. Let's get to our interview with Talia.
So yes, we are going to get to this conversation with Talia Schlanger. Just a bit of background for people who don't know who she is. She's a musician and radio broadcaster. She's worked both in Canada and the US. She was formerly a weekend host of CBC Radio 2 and NPR's music program World Cafe. But since leaving World Cafe, Schlanger has also been heard as a fill-in host for CBC Radio, including Here and Now and Q. And her debut album, Grace for the Going, was released February of this year. It also included a song about Tuffy, who was the last known frog of his species when he died in 2006. Let's take a listen to a song off her latest album, and then we'll get right into the interview.
And now the machine is calling you, darling, attention. Calling you, darling, attention. Now the machine is calling attention. Attention is our oxygen.
Is life really miserable for the Jews, or are we just glued to a 24-hour news cycle?
Should we be worried that so many young rabbis are coming out of seminary as anti-Zionists?
And what does Judaism say about polyamory?
If you want answers to these questions, well, we don't have any. But we do love asking them. Each week, tune into Bonjour Chai to hear debates and hot takes by me, Avi Feingold,
and me, Phoebe Maltz-Bovey,
as we sit down with pundits, rabbis, and scholars to talk about the most pressing issues facing Jews in Canada and around the world.
Listen and subscribe to Bonjour Chai at thecjn.ca/bonjour or wherever you get your podcasts.
So Talia, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So despite being deeply involved in the world of music and radio for most of your life, it was only this year that you released your very first album, Grace for the Going. What inspired you to do it now?
I think it's been a long time coming. And when I reflect on it now that the record's out, it's sort of, I I don't want to say a culmination, but it's a composite, or it's the sum of, I guess, everything that I've been doing in arts for my whole life. I started in musical theater as a performer, singing lots of other people's songs, and then interviewed artists for the better part of the last 6 years or so. And I think everything that I've collected along the way, along with my just deep, deep, deep love of music, led to this moment. And I guess it had never occurred to me earlier in my life, like in my teens or in my early 20s, that I could write music, that if I loved music, that I could try writing it too. So it's taken me a while to come around to give myself time to do that.
Let's unpack that a little bit. On your website, it talks about all of your inspirations behind this album, everything from Jeff Buckley to Missy Elliott to Patti Smith. And like you said, you started off in musical theater. Was anyone in your family musical or really into music that introduced you to such a broad spectrum of genres, or was that something you came to on your own?
The breadth I definitely came to on my own and sought out from when I was young, but the love of music runs deep in my family for sure. My mom teaches kindergarten and played guitar for her kids in kindergarten, which is a very different genre of music than I make now. And my dad, is like such a folky. His record collection is Joni Mitchell and Leonard Cohen, and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, and
a man after my own heart.
Yeah, totally. Mine too. I mean, I think that's the best early education, and the Beatles too. He's a huge Beatles guy. So I think that was pretty helpful. And then in the car when I was growing up, we had a Queen tape and a Huey Lewis and the News tape.
Oh, nice.
Right. And I think that those were expansive enough to sort of pique my musical interest and give me a little bit of that weird, quirky taste too that's guided the rest of my musical discovery. And then I discovered like Missy Elliott when I was in high school. I remember picking out her CD, that the album's So Addictive, at like a Chapters Indigo. And just seeing the cover and being like, what is this? And then listening to it. And that just rewired my whole brain and the way that I thought about words in music. And I've always been very curious.
Now, you actually went to Paris to write the music. What did that city give you that you maybe couldn't find here at home in Toronto?
Anonymity and freedom. I left a job right before that. I made a huge life change, and I was trying to give myself a chance to reset my life and also kind of reset my taste, because a big part of writing music for me is tapping into what my instinct is, and I think being really deliberate and not doubting my taste in anything. And my job before that had been based in listening to other artists' music, doing a deep dive interview on a different album every day. And so you're kind of forced to put your own taste aside maybe and dive into whatever it is required of you on any given day. And so I went to Paris to really get back in touch with my taste and to have nobody to answer to, and nothing to do except soak in some inspiration and then write accordingly. And it's such an amazing city to be anonymous in. Like, people talk so much about the romance of Paris and all of that, but what I loved about it most, especially for this purpose, was that nobody really cares what you're doing at all. You can take in like the best art in the world and also just disappear yourself completely. And that was really what I needed. And it also gave me the guitar that I wrote all of the record on. Yeah.
You spoke with Hey Alma back in February about the Jewish influences of the album and how it's a testament to your grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor. First off, your grandmother had quite the story. Can you give us a brief overview and then how that was infused into your song, See You Home?
Yeah, of course. I love telling this story, and I try to tell it at every show so that I can share her story, around the world, as it were. My Baba and my Zeta, so my grandparents on my father's side, both survived the Holocaust, and we were really close growing up. I spent a lot of time with them when I was a kid, and they're a huge part of who I am. And I think like I'm hearing from a lot of my peers with similar backgrounds, they didn't talk about what they went through They didn't talk about the worst of it for sure when we were kids, but we always had this awareness of what they had survived, and also of all the family members that we never got to meet because they, because of the Holocaust. And so my Baba, I heard this story for the first time actually at her funeral. My aunt told it, that my grandparents met towards the end of the war, and they gave birth to my aunt, to their first child, in a deportation camp in Germany. It had been the concentration camp Bergen-Belsen. They were never there when it was a concentration camp, but they were sent there as refugees when it became a DP camp. And so that's where they had my aunt. And it took almost 3 years for them to get permission to come to Canada to start their new life. This was where they chose to come to. And they were getting on the boat, and my Baba was terrified. Not just of like coming to a new place where she didn't speak the language and she didn't know anybody and she didn't know what it would be like after surviving just the unimaginable, but she was actually just really scared to cross the ocean, because it's a huge trip if you've never been on a ship before. Like, you've just survived a genocide, you're in your 20s, you have a toddler, and you're going to get on a ship and cross the ocean. Sorry, that's crazy. So and the particular journey that they were on was really, really rocky, really choppy waters. And as they were traveling, she could feel herself sinking and sinking and sinking and sinking. And she made a promise to her daughter, to my aunt, that if the waters rose and tried to overtake the ship, that she would just hold my aunt really high over her head and she would be saved, like with her last breath. And so, yeah, like I said, I heard that story for the first time at her funeral, when my aunt, who's the, kid in the story, told it. And I didn't even emotionally know what to do with it at that time. My Baba died when I was 14 or 15 years old. And I guess it took a couple of decades to write it into the song "See You Home." But, it kind of became a song in the mysterious way that songs do. And when I was writing it, I spent a lot of time just really thinking about her and looking at photographs of her, and kind of asking her through the ether to send that feeling through me, and to say whatever she wanted to say. So it kind of feels like a co-write with her. And it's the first song on the record. So
I saw one of your videos on Instagram where you clearly have a Magen David hanging from your neck. Was that intentional to wear? Have you always worn one? And, I guess what I'm really getting at is, were you scared or worried to share your Jewishness with the public these days?
I'm glad you asked that. I actually started wearing it because of these days. I hadn't before. And ever since October 7th, I've been, I think, more devoted to just being a visibly Jewish person.
I get that feeling, because I feel the same way too, right? I've got my wedding ring, which says Ani le Dodi ve Dodi li, which people recognize, and I sometimes wear my Star of David too. But it's true. It was after October 7th that I felt I also wanted to be more visibly out there.
Yeah, I'm wearing it all the time. I mean, I'm wearing it right now as we're talking, and it just, for me, because I meet so many different people in different places, especially, some of the places I've gone to play this music where they might never have met a Jewish person before. Like, I did a house concert in Riverport, Nova Scotia, where I was definitely the only Jew in the room, and maybe the first that they'd met. And for me, the news cycle is so troubling and so upsetting. And for a lot of people, all they know about Jews is what they read. And I just want to have as many opportunities as possible to be a Jewish person that somebody knows, and to hopefully have a good exchange together. And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
What has it been like that? I know you've been on the road touring for sure. When people find out that you're Jewish, have these relationships been encouraging or discouraging?
I think, I don't know. I think heartening, because the thing that happens with "See You Home," for example, when I tell that story of my Baba and of the Holocaust, I was a little bit scared maybe in the beginning to take it to new places. And the thing that inevitably happens is that somebody tells me their own family immigration story after the show. And it's, that's happened now a dozen times, and it's never been a Jewish story. It's just been like a human story of, somebody's Dutch grandparents who didn't like what was happening in Europe and decided to come here, or whatever it is. And then we find a shared humanity. And then I find what I'm finding is it's actually not about being Jewish at all. It's just that's sort of like just a reality, and what we share is our humanity. So I think that's the bridge that I'm hoping to build just by being a visibly Jewish person at this time.
Really beautiful. Changing gears a little bit, I'm curious from an artistic perspective, now that you're more in the forefront as a performer, how has your history working as a host informed your career? Like, you have all this back insight of like what goes on behind the scenes and maybe how to market yourself. Like, has that been helpful, and in what ways?
I think from a songwriting perspective and an artistic perspective, it's been massively helpful because I've gotten to spend time with some of my greatest songwriting heroes and ask them questions about their process. So I feel like I do have such a lucky deep well of really, firsthand experiences with people that are inspiring. From a business perspective, like you mentioned, marketing and all that stuff, zero help, absolutely no clue. I could I could never have anticipated what it's actually like to put out a record, try to get people to listen to it, try to play it for people out in the world. Like, it's really way harder and more draining than I ever thought. And I kind of wish that I had asked musicians a little bit more about the mundane day-to-day of this career, because I would have been better equipped.
Okay, yes, because I do want to talk about grant writing. I want to talk about the Canada Council for the Grant, because to me, listen, I listen to Q As It Happens, Day 6 on CBC, which you've hosted many times. You're a bit of a celebrity to me, which, when hearing that you still had to go through all the same hoops as any small Canadian artist applying for these grants just to get the album off the ground, is quite surprising. As someone who's worked in the US and Canada, do you think that our art system or our funding model helps or hinders the development of musicians like yourself?
Something I'm happy to talk about. I mean, I'm glad you asked. I got rejected for my first grant application through Canada Council for the record.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That is totally a rite of passage. And
yes, it is.
It is. We've all been there.
Right? And grant writing, grant writing is its own weird thing, because you're trying to...
It's its own beast.
Yeah, you're trying to say what a project is before you've done it. And but I did find, I was rejected the first time, and I was like, oh man, this blows. I don't know if I'm going to go through this again, but I did. And I gutted my application, totally rewrote it, reframed it. And it was kind of a useful exercise. I hate to say that, but it was kind of useful because it helped me drill down on actually why I needed money and what I was trying to do. But I mean, the thing is, like, I'll answer your question, but I also have to say, like, because I have a front facing job a lot of the time on radio, I think people make a lot of assumptions about where I might be at. But the truth is, I'm a freelancer at CBC. Like, I left all of my job security when I left my job in Philly. So now I fill in when and as I can. And I definitely relied on that grant funding. Otherwise, I never would have been able to make my record. I didn't get paid myself from the grant. It all went to, paying my producer and paying musicians. And I still had to go out of pocket after that. And you're still taxed on grant money.
You are, absolutely.
Which people don't really realize. And, the system is, I'm so grateful for the funding that I receive, but the system is so subjective. It's really hard to crack. Just because you're an amazing artist doesn't mean you're amazing at the skill that it is to write a grant. Yeah. It's really hard. Canada Council was immensely helpful. Like, I had a liaison person even throughout the process who was incredibly helpful, which I really appreciate. And I'm so glad that the funding is there. But it definitely doesn't solve everything. And I definitely made a huge financial sacrifice to make the record. My life completely changed. I went to, like, living in a really small sublet studio apartment where my recording studio and writing space was my kitchen, was my gym, was my everything, and have been living very, very small and very lean to try to make this happen. So funding is great because it lets you hopefully pay other artists and musicians, but it certainly doesn't solve the great difficulty of being an artist in a world where people don't pay for art.
I hear you.
Yikes, that's not very fun to talk about, but it is important.
But it is important, and I think a lot of people don't even know about it.
Yes.
Like, unless you work in the arts, I don't think Joe Schmo on the street knows the amount of time that we put in trying to just fund the projects that we want to do. And it's exactly like what you said. You can be a great writer and still not get a grant. And I agree, having been through the grant process myself, that it really makes you realize, you know what, maybe my idea isn't as clear as I thought that it was. Because it's true. You have to get really, really, really clear. And it's the thing that we don't learn when we go into the arts. You think, I'm an artist, I'm not going to have to deal with all this bureaucratic stuff. And then you do, if you want to get funding.
Totally. And I the record is out on Latent Recordings, which is Cowboy Junkie's label, and because of that, I have their help with access to Factor funding, for which I'm also really grateful that Factor exists. And at the same time, Factor funding, covers 50% of my expenses, which is amazing. And it also means that anything I want to do, I have to find the other half of the budget for. So it's it really is challenging, and I'm at a point where I'm grappling with lots of financial questions.
Now, you've been on the road. I don't know if you're still touring right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're calling we'll call it like sporadic touring right now because I'm managing it and booking it all myself. But yes, I'm playing dates.
So what does performing live give you that maybe recording in a studio cannot replicate?
Oh, it's so different, and I love it. I love it so much. The songs are so different live than they are on the record, especially band shows. The guys that are in my core band, Kevin Bright, the guitarist, and Davide Di Renzo, drummer, and Brian Kobayakawa, bass player, just explosively creative people. And we kind of approach live shows as like anything can happen, and it often does. The arrangements are sort of more like suggestions. So where the recorded versions of the songs are very manicured, and we took so much time and care to tuck every sound just so. David Traversmith, who produced the record, we arranged it together and just spent so much time thinking about where each sound should go. And live, it's just off the rails. So we have a great time. The songs have changed for me so much by playing them live, and it's really, really fun. It's like my favorite thing.
How have you seen the landscape of music journalism and radio change over the course of your career? And maybe what trends do you foresee shaping its future?
That's a big question.
I ask only the big questions here.
That's a big question. When I started in Philly, like in 2016 at World Cafe, it was the beginning of a really exciting moment of sort of widening the lens on who gets to talk about their music. It was a really big topic of conversation at that time, how to make sure that we included more female and non-binary and racially diverse voices on the show at that time. And I think that there were also so many artists that came out at that time that were just undeniable, like sort of in the genre that we were working in, just like explosively exciting people. I'm thinking of Phoebe Bridgers, and I'm thinking of Lizzo, and people that really changed the conversation. And in a way that was like, okay, old industry, like you can have whatever, you could put people into whatever boxes you want, or you can have whatever prejudices or biases that you want, but these people are coming for you. So, you're probably going to want to talk to them. That was a really exciting moment. And I feel like the frame is hopefully more wide open. Hopefully people who are artists are feeling that way, that tastes are more open, minds are less closed, hopefully. But I think what I'm seeing happening now a lot, and it bothers me, is that there's a lot of emphasis on online success and numbers and things going viral in terms of artists that are getting attention and are people that a news outlet would want to talk to. And I think sort of as a as a criteria for art, I just think that's so bizarre. Like, what are we talking about? There are lots of people who have explosive viral success who really deserve it, who are amazing musicians. And then there are a lot of people who have it and aren't necessarily making the most interesting art. So I think that culturally, what I hope we fight for, people in positions of power, people who choose who to speak to on the radio or in magazines or whatever, continue to fight for artistic merit as they perceive it, that we all sort of continue to fight for our taste. I just think that's so important, and to continue to reward and encourage innovative and superhuman artistry, human artistry, something that the bots can't figure out how to do.
Because you've said that your music, quote, doesn't sound like money, which I'm assuming this is what you're referring to. What does it sound like?
Oh, I don't know. I think it sounds like everything that I've been through and everything that I've heard in my life. I really tried to look for emotional honesty in what I was writing, and also in the recording of things, like, hearing my own voice back was a big part of this process, and choosing takes and choosing lines. And I don't know how to really articulate it, but I did know it when I heard it, which is like, does this sound like I'm telling you the truth? Does it sound like I'm trying to sound nice, or does it sound like I'm telling you something that's true? And I'm really only interested in the latter when it comes to art, and that goes for every note that's played, every piece of guitar, every other instrumental that's added. So I think hopefully it sounds like really super truth and humanity, I think.
Talia Schlanger, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and for the very thoughtful questions.
I will hold you high, and I will see you home.
So it is summertime. Things are a little slower down here on the east part of Canada. David, what's going on out west?
All right, I have two things that are happening in and around Western Canada. The first thing is, I think last time we chatted, there was like a Jewish walking tour. This time it's happening in Calgary. It's the Jewish Marda Loop walking tour. And if you don't know where Marda Loop is, it's a very trendy neighborhood in Calgary. You can join historian and raconteur par excellence Harry Sanders to learn more about the dynamic history of Marda Loop as it intersects with the history of the Jewish community in Calgary. This program is part of the historic Calgary Week. You can always just email jhssa@shaw.ca for more information about that walking tour that is happening on July 30th.
Cool. I'm just going in chronological order in terms of time, even though I did bring this up last episode. Don't forget that the Ashkenaz Festival and Magen Boys are at Earl Bales. So the next one will be Monday, July 29th. And then there are two other dates in August 12th, August 26th. There's a wide variety of music. One is listed as soul R&B with Yiddish. There's a European, Balkan, Middle Eastern fusion, all sorts of stuff. So be sure to check that out if you're in Toronto.
And heading back over to my part of the country, Ilana, do you remember when we interviewed Bobby Goddard a while back?
Of course.
Well, she's back in Canada this time. She landed in Calgary just in time for the Stampede. I got to see her, and I got to see her and her fiance perform. She is honestly fantastic. She is pitch perfect. She is a wonderful musician. And she and her fiance, Bobby and the No Name Tour, is going to be heading across Western Canada. I'll give you some dates. August the 10th in Greenwater, Saskatchewan. August 17th in Clearwater, Saskatchewan. August the 23rd in Saskatoon, and August 24th at Aquado Beach, Saskatchewan. If you live in Calgary, you missed her already. She came and went, and she's gonna finish up the tour, obviously in Saskatchewan. So if you're there, check her out.
And lastly, at the Museum of Jewish Montreal, on August 4th, there will be a queer family craft brunch with bagels and nosh and tie-dye. So it's you can bring your kids, bring something to tie-dye, and you can buy tickets for that at the website. You can buy tickets for that on the Museum of Jewish Montreal's website.
Lovely, lovely. Well, Ilana, I think we're going to take a bit of a summer break right now. We both got exciting things happening. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, about what you're planning.
What I'm planning? Well, I'm about to go on my honeymoon.
Yay!
My childhood best friend lives in Australia and she is getting married. So we decided to go and turn it into our honeymoon since it is very far and pricey to get to. So I'm going to be gone for a while, which I am really excited. And it doesn't even feel real yet, to be honest. I haven't taken this much time off from acting in a long time. So I'm just like, but here we go. It's my honeymoon. I'm going to try my best to, not think about any work that I might be missing and enjoy the rainforest and the beach and seeing my friend who I haven't seen in like 3 years.
You're going to be hitting Sydney or Melbourne or somewhere else?
Yeah. So my friend lives in Melbourne and the wedding is going to be at a vineyard near Melbourne. And then we're going up to the Great Barrier Reef and then to the Outback.
I've never been, but that sounds fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. And then when I get back, I have one day and then I'm heading off to the Klez Canada retreat. So it's going to be a fun-filled summer.
Absolutely.
How about you, David?
I'm going to take a little time off. I'm going to Seattle next week to visit my brother-in-law just for a few days.
Nice.
And then I'll be coming to Montreal sometime in August.
And we will not be crossing paths.
I think we're just going to miss each other by like a day or two.
A day.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to hearing more about how your program up north in the woods is going.
Yeah. We're putting together some ideas for our fall episodes. If you know of anything that's going on in Canada that is culturally Jewish, feel free to reach out to our producer, Michael, and you can visit us at thecjn.ca/culture to reach out. Have a good summer, everyone.
Take care.
Culturally Jewish is hosted by me, David Sklar, and
Ilana Zackon.
We're produced and edited by Michael Fraiman, and our theme music is by Sarah Siegel-Lazar. We're a member of the CJN Podcast Network. To support our work and everything the CJN does, visit thecjn.ca/donate to make a monthly donation and receive a charitable tax receipt.
Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time.
Remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest-running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.